Thank you so much for being part of our podcast, Why Wool, today. And we are at the farm of Susan and Michael Sox, and it is the Sox family farm in Cabot, Vermont. So welcome, and thanks so much for being willing to talk to me today.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Why sheep in particular? Like, why did you start with that animal?
So our land is wide open. We have lots of pasture space, but the soil is very, very thin. Mm-hmm. It's very wet. It's very clay. We're just over bedrock. So we knew we wanted to do something bigger than chickens and ducks, but felt like the soil would just be way too fragile for something as big as even a small milking cow. And we weren't so sure about goats and how hard they are to keep fenced. So that kind of sheep was sort of the default, and to be honest, we weren't psyched about it originally. We had heard horror stories from other people about sheep, but we thought we'd give it a try for a year and see what happened, and it turned out that they were actually pretty awesome.
Great. And what breed do you have?
So it's a sort of a mixed lot. We have Tunis, we have Dorset. And not all in one. It's not like we have a bunch
Dorset
of Tunis and a bunch of Dorset. Everything's crossed with everything else. So it's mixes of Tunis, Dorset, and Finn primarily. Mm-hmm. There's a couple oddball things. There's like a little bit of Southdown. There's a little bit of black-faced Leicester. It's very much a backyard mutt mix, though. The size of the flock changes through the season. Mm-hmm. We overwinter 10. And then in the summer, we're generally at about 25 or 26 animals.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that primarily you guys deal in wool or in meat or the combination of the two?
Primarily meat.
Primarily meat.
Yeah. We don't really have an outlet for the wool so much. Most of it we give away. Mm-hmm. And just recently we've tried to find some places to send it. And,
right.
We just don't produce all that much
mm-hmm.
in the wool department.
But we do tanned sheepskins.
And you sell them? Do you sell them on farm, or do you?
Usually it's right directly on farm.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few winter markets in the area that we'll send our stuff to and sell a few that way as well.
Do you do any of the farmers markets or anything like that with your things? Or
we don't. We've had pretty good luck just having people come out to the farm.
Yeah, and you have a beautiful website.
Thank you.
Tell me the name of the website.
So the website is www.soxfamilyfarm.weebly.com. We also raise broilers, some for ourselves, but most of them get sold to customers. We host campers, so agritourism. We have people come in and stay here and go for tours, and they can add on other extras like buying a sheepskin. We also make our own sheep tallow soap. We render down tallow after fall butchering and make soap in the winter. We do a small amount of pick your own. And primarily, the rest of our growing is to keep us fed through the year. So while it's not actually being sold off farm, it does cut back on our grocery bills considerably when we're growing almost all of our own meat and eggs and vegetables and fruit. Mm-hmm. So all you get at the grocery store is dairy and grains pretty much.
Mm-hmm. And you both do, I know that you do gardening, landscaping. Is that... someone comes, do you come to people, or do they come here, or how does that work?
That's also a bit of both. Primarily I'm going to people's houses and helping them with existing gardens, but I also do consulting. Mm-hmm. And so it's a mix of whether I'm going out there or whether they're coming here to tour around and take a look at what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So we try to use some of what we've done here as not exactly experimental, but sort of just educational spots. Like, this is one way you can do some berries, and this is another way that you could do berries, and mm-hmm. this is how you can integrate things together, and this is how you can cut on your labor for doing a vegetable garden.
Mm-hmm. And so you're really primarily on farm and some off farm. Is that correct?
I am about 50-50 at this point.
And Michael, what are you?
So I'm an engineering consultant. So I work off farm, but I'm fortunate in that I get to work from home most of the time.
Oh, that's nice.
So I'm generally here.
Yes, off farm, but he's just a floor
upstairs, right?
Within a call away, right?
Yeah. So even before the pandemic, I was working from home since we moved out here in 2007.
And does that afford you the opportunity to do things on the farm
It does,
easier.
absolutely. So I'm here to help out for some of the larger projects and do chores when Susie's away and those kinds of things. So yes, it's a nice mix to be able to work from home, but also have the income off farm that makes all this possible.
Yeah, it's a big focus or emphasis of mine with the gardening and the consulting business is that you can grow your own food and it doesn't have to take up your whole life or your whole summer vacation. There's a lot of labor saving to be had if you just do a little bit of planning, a little bit of infrastructure. And again, that's what folks see when they come to visit us.
Yeah,
It's
and,
really
and I'd say this was kind of part of a plan. You know, we kind of envisioned our lives like this, and so we sort of realized what we had laid out so many years ago, and that we'd be able to balance things this way, and we've, I think, succeeded at it.
I actually grew up in the same small town, so it's not like we met each other when we were in our 20s and knew that we wanted to be farmers. We don't know when we first met each other.
Oh, you were like little kids?
Probably,
Yeah, we were a grade apart in a K through 12 system, so he was just always there.
And still is.
And still is.
That's wonderful.
But I think I started realizing that I had an interest in growing things in my mid-20s, and we had already been married for a few years by then, and Michael's just been really supportive of these notions of mine.
Yeah, we grew up in a rural area. We actually grew up in southeastern Michigan. That's where we're originally from.
Oh, okay.
Before we migrated to New England and ultimately here in Vermont. But I think that I liked rural living, and I think that the place that we grew up kind of changed into suburbia while we were living there.
Yeah.
And so this move back to this part of Vermont is a little bit like moving back to home that we grew up in, I would say.
And what you wanted.
And what we wanted to,
Yeah.
the way we wanted to live and where we wanted to live.
Right. So it's nice, neither of you had to talk each other into it. It was something you always wanted to do.
Right.
And you've raised how many children here?
2.
2 children. And you said a little bit, the kids, you don't think the kids will follow suit, but have they enjoyed, has it been a good experience raising them?
Absolutely. Yes, I always told them ever since they were pretty little that, I'm not going to force you into doing any of these farm chores, but I do think it's important that, whether you're going to be an accountant or a mechanic or a doctor or an engineer, it's a good idea to know how to grow a head of lettuce and raise a couple of chickens for eggs. It's just a basic life skill that we wanted to pass on to them. So I feel like they're not going to be farmers, but they do have a very good appreciation of good food. They know the difference between good food and lousy food.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, they both can cook. One of them a little more strongly than the other. And they've actually been coming back to the farm to pick up groceries from mom and dad because they got a little tired of what they could get at Costco.
I'm sure.
So I find that a very promising sign.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there a community in this area for raising sheep and other animals? So you were just saying that before we got here, you just processed chickens. So do you have, we were talking at our first podcast, and the woman was saying that there's such a strong community of people that are willing to help and support people raising animals. Do you find that, or is this something you really kind of had to independently learn?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that we have a strong network right here in Cabot of, maybe we do. I have a lot of neighbors and friends who have, at the beginning especially, had been homesteaders already and were very willing to lend a lot of their support and a lot of their learning. And they were an inspiration to me that, yes, you can have a couple of small kids and have a vegetable garden and grow some blueberry bushes. So there is a good informal network of neighbors. One of our biggest supports, though, has also been NOFA Vermont, because the workshops and the classes we've done through NOFA over the last dozen or more years have been just really invaluable. And that's where I learned how to slaughter chickens, was actually at a NOFA workshop. And I've gone on and actually helped some of my friends and neighbors to do their own backyard slaughtering based on learning how to do this with NOFA first.
Yeah, I'd say the skills that we've had raising our animals. Our original flock of sheep was sort of a hand-me-down from, I'd say, a family that had been doing homesteading for a long time and served as mentors early on. Our original slaughtering that we do on farm, someone came and showed us how to do that.
For the larger animals.
For the large animals.
For pigs and sheep.
And so we've definitely taken advantage of the kindness of neighbors to show us and develop the skills that we have. Because we certainly didn't grow up with these skills ourselves.
And so then do you feel, besides your children, kind of an obligation to pay that forward to other people who farm or homestead? Or
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was one of the reasons I wanted to start doing this gardening and homesteading consulting, is so that we could have an outlet to get some of this knowledge out to more people. And it was a big push behind why we opened our land for campers to come and tour around and ask their questions about homesteading while they're staying with us. We did 4-H classes for a couple of years. They're free classes for kids to come up. And enrollment dropped on those, so we're not doing that anymore. But we're definitely always looking for ways that we can learn from other people, but also push out what we know to the bigger community.
Because you use your animals for both wool and meat for sheep, can you tell us a little bit about the positive aspects and the negative aspects of each?
Oh gosh, I can't think of much negative on the meat side.
How did you find when you began, processing? Was that a difficult transition to make? Because, you begin and you know the animals and, you know what I mean? Was that a difficult transition for you? Or how did you make peace with that, accept that?
I guess I am not perhaps the most tender-hearted of livestock owners. When we got our sheep, I knew that they were for meat. We gave them edible names so we would not forget.
Like lamb chop.
Ketchup and mustard were some of
our
early lambs.
first two were ketchup and mustard.
Okay.
We bought them specifically as feeder lambs. So I would say that we just always had that in mind from the start. So even though we're taking care of them, we do know that's what the end point is. So maybe we all, along the way, we're keeping a little bit of remove from that and not getting too emotionally attached to them. We still want them to have the best life possible and take really good care of them, and want them to thrive as much as they can and have a great time while they're here. But honestly, when it's slaughter day, that to me, it's kind of like cooking. It's like cooking from scratch, but like uber cooking from scratch.
Yeah.
It's like you take a potato and you wash it and you dice it up, and it's just a preparatory step for feeding yourself.
And you understand too that whole, really, and your children come to understand that whole cycle. You have fulfilled the cycle.
Yep. Yeah, my children have never had any issue when it comes to slaughter days, and maybe it is because they started when they were really young, or maybe they just have some of my temperament. And so you have your products, your meat. Where do you sell your products? You said that you had. Tell us different things that you have, and where, do you sell directly off your farm when people are here camping, or how does that work? Do you want to speak to this?
Oh, no, you should speak to the regulations that we were just talking about for on-farm slaughter and so on.
Yeah, so primarily we sell all of our products right off a farm. I have a number of customers that have been with us for many, many years, probably a dozen or more years at this point. So we haven't had to do much advertising. It's primarily just been word of mouth. And I keep an email list of everybody who ordered the previous year, and I just send out, say, hey, we're going to be slaughtering chickens in 2 weeks. How many do you think you'd like? And then I let people know when their chickens are ready to pick up, and it's just kind of as easy as that. It's been very similar for the lamb. So when we started raising lamb for sale, my chicken customers had actually been asking for a couple of seasons. They knew that we were doing lamb for ourselves, and like, can I buy a lamb? Can I buy a lamb? I'm like, I don't know. That is actually a much bigger hurdle. There's more regulations for the state. But eventually they did wear us down, and we started offering lamb to them too. So we haven't needed to do farmers markets or a whole lot of advertising or anything. We're so small scale, and we already have a customer base. So kind of similar for the sheepskins at this point. People in town just know that we raise sheep, So.
I guess the question, kind of leads to the idea. I think there's been a lot of kind of a word on the street, if you will, that it is really difficult to sell sheep products. In other words, like why wool? Why we're asking that. But it sounds like in a small community, because Cabot's a small community, you still find enough people, and you didn't seem like that's really difficult for you. So that kind of contradicts that.
Yeah, people are definitely looking for farm-raised meats. People out here, at least in our part of Vermont, they know about good food. A lot of them grew up on farms, and some of them just don't have the time or the interest in raising their own animals anymore, but they still want to eat well.
Mm-hmm.
So there does seem to be plenty of demand out there for good meat.
I guess I'll just echo something that Susie had already said, in that we want the animals to have the best life possible. And that final day that they have with us shouldn't feel any different. That's one of the reasons we're supporters of on-farm slaughter. It's like there's no stress to the animal. They're home, right? And the last thing they remember is the life that they've had on the farm previously. There's no change. There's no stress.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's the best case for the animal's well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so all of our meat is on farm. We don't ship anything out to a slaughterhouse. So the sheep, the chickens, when we did pigs, we haven't for a number of years, but the pigs were done on farm. We've done geese, ducks, just all right here. So as far as the importance of animal husbandry, I think if you're going to be responsible for an animal, you owe it to the animal to give it a good natural life where it can do all the things it's meant to do. Chickens need to be able to roam and scratch and sleep in the shade, and obviously have plenty of fresh water and food. But they like to hang out and socialize and be chickens. They shouldn't be all penned up in some little tiny space.
Mm-hmm.
Sheep are obviously very social, and you shouldn't have one sheep off by itself. There should always be groups of sheep, and they also really like to hang out in the shade and relax. So I feel like if your animals can do their natural behaviors, if they're healthy, if they seem happy in that way, then you're doing a good job. And you should be ready to provide that before you bring them on farm. I have heard stories of people just spur of the moment deciding to, go get a few chicks or grab a lamb, and they haven't thought through fencing or veterinary care or feed or where's the water going to come from, and that'll definitely set you up for a bad time.
Mm-hmm.
So if people are going to get into this, think it through first.
So responsibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And planning.
Bigger than us. Yeah.
Responsibility and planning are really key.
Yeah. So how do you manage your flock? Do you use, I don't see, your dog, your lab looks really nice. I'm not sure it's a herding dog.
No way.
So are you, how do you move your flock? And, I see that you're using FlexiNet. What are the things that you have in place on your land to manage your flock?
So for the growing season, late April through very end of November, sometimes early December, all of our animals are outdoors. And we do use the electric netting. We tend to put the sheep in about 4 lengths of netting. Mm-hmm. That gives us, I should know what the acreage is, but I don't. Anyway, they're 164 feet long, 4 of them together. Mm-hmm. And that gets moved every 5 to 7 days, just depending on growing conditions. So it's not quite intensive rotational grazing. We're not moving them that often, right. But they're also not just sitting in a paddock for 6 months and chewing the ground down to nothing. Mm-hmm. So it's as close to intensive rotational grazing as we're able to do. We also keep the chickens in large rounds of netting. The hens get moved less often. The broilers we will again move probably about every 5 to 7 days or more sometimes, depending on conditions. Mm-hmm. So we try to keep the animals moving. It's better for their health. It's certainly better for the pasture. If you leave animals in one spot for a while, they'll beat it up in a hurry.
And you must agree with the phrase, I love this, when it says, when all is said and done, we are essentially grass growers, right?
Grass
I mean,
farmers, yeah.
grass
Oh yeah,
farmers,
you're
that's-
grass farmers before you're anything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, how do you move when you're moving them? Are you dependent on your electronet, or are your sheep such that you can say, "Come on," and they follow you?
Well, they actually will follow us. They're pretty good.
Because they
about that.
know the grass is greener on the other side of that
That's
electronet.
right.
Of course it is. Yeah, most of the time when we move them, what we've done is they're in their or I don't know what you call it, your 4 lengths of net.
Yeah.
We'll set another 4 lengths of net right next to it, almost like, like a snowman or kind of thing. And then we'll just lift it and they'll run right through because they know where the good stuff is.
Yeah.
When we do have to bring them back into their corral for veterinary work, like, hoof trimming, vaccinations, what have you, we just grab a bucket of alfalfa and they'll pretty much follow you to the ends of the earth with a bucket of alfalfa.
And I act as the sheepdog chasing behind just to keep them all together.
Yes, that's been an important job for my husband and my kids. I'll come in and say, I need 2 sheepdogs, and
That's
they know what that means.
They do. I find sometimes, even though I have 3 border collies, I sometimes say to my husband, "Come by, come by," and he does know. He's very good. Okay, so what is the best part, philosophically, of living this life? And I want to hear it from both of you, because you have it strikes me that your foot is a bit more than her foot is in the door of the split, right? So let's start with you. So is farming something you did and do with your whole family? And, what is the best part of this for you? Because you had this dream, sounds like from the time you were toddlers, and, what is it that you like about it?
I mean, the easiest thing for me to say is just that I want to live in a beautiful place, and I want that place to get better as a result of my having lived there. And
Nice.
so I feel like this lifestyle and the things that we're doing on this piece of land is making it better. Where we are here is sort of it's an old hill farm. It was a little bit tired when we got here. The soils, as Susie says, are pretty thin and fragile. And I think that it got overused for dairy in the past. And
It was a dairy farm previously?
Yes.
yeah, it was part of a very large dairy farm in this
Okay.
area because it took that much acreage to
Right.
find enough feed for the herd. But so we've got our little 30-acre piece of it, and I feel like we've made the grass better. We've noticed some pretty significant changes in the land since we've been here, and we just want to do our part to make it even better.
And that's your legacy. That's the farming legacy. Yeah. What about you?
Well, I agree 100% with everything Michael said. I do think that being on a piece of land year after year is incredibly rewarding because we're, in addition to seeing the animals out there and enjoying their space, we are seeing improvements in the pasture. We're seeing lots of insects, lots of other meadow plants that aren't just grass out there. We've put in all kinds of native shrubs and trees sort of in perimeter spaces to reforest this area a little bit, and watching these things grow up has been incredibly rewarding. But on the selfish side, I really like the way we eat. It's just really nice in the middle of winter to have like a big pot of lamb stew that's all chock full of carrots and onions and potatoes that we grew over the summer, and you throw in some herbs that you saved, and like the smell just comes up in your face, and a bowl of frozen berries for dessert from your harvest in July. That's hard to beat. And when you serve that to your family or when you have friends over, it's really nice. I would say the hardest part is that it is work. You're getting up early and you're grubby and sweaty a lot of the time. It's just a lot of hard labor. And there are some days where I sort of wonder, like, what would my life be like if I lived in a condo and I just shopped at a food co-op? Because there's really good food there too.
Yeah.
What would it be like to have free time?
Yeah.
But then I realized that if I had free time, I would probably be gardening at a community garden, and then I would just end up back here again. So I would say that's the hard part sometimes.
I'd say it's the cost of things relative to the income. from the work that we do. I mean, I work off farm, which, like I say, is what makes this possible. Cost of land, even out here in quite a rural area, not close to a population center, is still very expensive. So my off-farm work is what made it possible for us to settle here in the first place. Also, equipment. You know, we're fortunate that we have a neighbor who hays our land for us, and that's where we get our winter feed. And in payment is a cut of the hay that comes off of our land is used for their horses. And so we have a fortunate arrangement where we have enough land that we can get our hay in for free, essentially. It's coming from our land, they're doing the work, but the cost of buying hay would be, I mean, a huge expense relative to our income.
And the cost of buying hay and equipment would be much worse.
Yeah.
Yes. And are you finding, post-COVID, post-COVID, are you finding the prices are in relation, are higher still, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. We
feed and things.
Right. We were trying to hold what we charge for our broiler chickens steady for the last 2-3 years, and I finally had to bump it up just a little bit this year. The feed cost was so much higher this time around. So what the additional I charged to our customers wasn't really completely enough to offset that. So we're definitely not making quite as much as we would have in other years, but I feel like kind of splitting the difference between us and them is fine.
Well, we've managed to stay organic with the organic feed. I mean,
yeah. But and as far as other supplies, we haven't had to buy too much yet, but I was just looking at all of our netting. Some of it's getting pretty old, and I'm going to have to order a bunch this winter, and I'm a little afraid of... I still remember the price from 6 or 7 years ago, and I don't think I'm going to like it when I put that order in.
Selective memory. Let it go. Yeah. So, given the hard part, I think one of the hard parts, and something that I know that my husband and I think about a lot, is, you know, the days when you could, like, leave... bye-bye, and off you go. So are you able to, you leave the farm to go work, but he's here. You know, but somebody's always here. So are you able, does this life, do you find that it infringes on your ability to do other things, or is it so predominant that you're okay with that?
Yes to both of those things, actually. I think we love being here. So it doesn't feel like a hardship that we do need to be here most of the time. But that said, we do travel sometimes. We have family in Michigan, and we reliably have been going out there for a week to 10 days every year. We have a couple of people around here who we've hired as farm sitters. They're very reliable. A few times we've had neighbors on this road just step in and take care of things for us so we could go see our family. We also sometimes just split who's traveling. I went to Colorado last year, and my husband was kind enough to stay here while I goofed around and went skiing with one of my children who's working at a ski resort for the winter. And sometimes he's traveling for work to less exciting places than Colorado, but still traveling. And then I'll just know that, 100% I need to be here for chores and everything else while he's away.
we're not so much for traveling. I think we're happy here. That's one of the nice things. It's like we feel like we're always on vacation.
Right.
So it's a nice place to be regardless.
Right. I mean, it can be a hard thing, like, oh, I have a terrible time with the, butchering, or, I mean, it can even be as logistical as that.
Mm.
Anything that is tough for you here?
I don't know.
I guess it's not that bad where we are. There's certainly there are times when things go wrong. I would say the days that I hate the most, that'd be when I go to see the sheep and one of them is limping, because that means that I waited too long to trim their hooves, and that means I've got to take a bunch of time out of my day, get everybody back up and see what's going on. That's not good. Occasionally we've had some predator issues. We actually struggled with that more this year than we ever have in the past. So we've had a couple unpleasant days where we've woken up to a bunch of dead chickens, even though we thought we had them secure, and it just turned out that the methods that we've used for over a decade weren't quite as adequate as we thought they were, and the animals have taught us that now. As far as predator attacks, I'm definitely of two minds, because on one hand, it's awful to see that happen to your livestock, and it means that you failed somehow in your protection of them. And on the other hand, I'm glad to know that we're sharing our land with other animals. It means that we haven't pushed out the wildlife entirely, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, if you wanted to leave the farm, it sounds like that's part of the community that we talked about, right? There's still people, and your kids are getting older. that can be helpful too. So I guess that it all falls down to the question of how you find a good work-life balance. It's exhausting to work all day and then come home and work into the night. How do you deal with that? Is that just another acceptance issue, or sometimes you just have to suck it up, as they say?
I think for me it's probably more acceptance. I've never really minded working a lot. I just sort of have that natural tendency. I was the overachiever in high school who got good grades and was in like 3 or 4 extracurricular activities and had something planned pretty much every day of the week and every afternoon. So I guess I'm just sort of a busybody that way, and so it's been okay for me.
There are some late nights for Susie in particular. Harvest season comes and it all kind of hits at the same time.
Yeah.
You've got a short growing season, a lot happens, and there are some nights at 2 or 3 in the morning she's canning or butchering or something late into the night. So there are very intense periods of activity on any kind of farm. Mm-hmm. You get a bit of a break in the winter, so when things start to tail off in November into December, it's somewhat of a relief. Things slow down a little bit. You know, the animals aren't on pasture anymore. They're in, and it's feeding out hay, and you have half-hour chores in the morning and a half-hour in the afternoon. But other than that,
it's a little quiet.
It's pretty quiet.
So I'd say
and predictable.
Part of our work-life balance is that maybe you're not going to get that dinner date out with your husband once a week like they tell you in those new parenting books that everybody should definitely throw in the fire. But we know that like the summer is it's going to be a marathon, and when it's all said and done, then we're going to have a few months where we can really hang out and read through that stack of books and play some music and do board games and maybe think about, taking a quick trip out to Michigan to see the old folks. So just knowing that it's more of a cyclical type thing. It's not like you're going to get that me time for a certain amount every week all through the year.
And I think we've scaled it to what we can manage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're probably on the verge of maybe scaling back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we've been doing more than is what we want to do long term, so we may scale back a little bit. But I think that we've sort of ramped up slowly, got to a point, stayed there for a while, and now I think we're probably evaluating whether we want to keep going at this level or scale back some of our activities a little bit.
So this kind of speaks to what you were talking about, someone who might be interested in starting this kind of life and the reality of this kind of life. And it isn't a fall into thing. It sounds like every step of the way you have to create some sort of a plan so that it works. There's a bit of jumping into it in a way, but it sounds like you're talking about the scaling and the growing, and that's something you guys are working on together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for sure.
Trying to figure out what the next step is for you.
Yep. Yeah, it was one thing to be growing food for a reliable family of 4, and now our kids are mostly on their own, so they don't need quite as much feeding, and honestly, that's a huge part of what we do here is feeding ourselves. So we found that we canned quite a bit more than we needed last year, and still have a lot of leftover canned goods. So we are sort of definitely in a bit of a life transition and figuring out the next phase of things.
It strikes me when I'm speaking to you that you have a very nice balance, because your understanding of wanting to use your sheep, because that's what we're speaking to, using your sheep to farm and to sell, and the reality of being a farm versus a hobby. But at the same time, it sounds to me very much that you also are farming because of the lifestyle and because of the joy I mean, it's really clear that brings you joy. So what, if you could pick one piece of advice to people who would say, I would like to do this, what would be your advice?
My advice would be just sit down and make a plan and keep it small. So for instance, if somebody wanted to have a big vegetable garden, I might caution them like, all right, maybe for year one, maybe let's put in 2 raised beds. Let's make sure we can source those and have them in the ground, including the soil, in April. So I'm kind of I tend to caution people to think ahead and start small, or the two really important points to keep in mind.
How about you, Michael?
I would say find somebody that you think is doing what you like to do and really talk to them about it. Go visit it, visit their operation, ask them questions, get a sense for it, maybe offer to take over their chores for a week to kind of live that life, and see if it's something that you really want to do. Give it a try in a kind of a no risk way before you jump in. I think that's a good approach. Give it a try before jumping into it both feet, maybe.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. So I'd like to know then, you sell things on the farm, but tell us again, you spoke to it at the beginning, but how do I find you? How do when I see this? I also wanted to welcome you to VSGA,
Thank
new
you.
members. Thank you very much. And so tell us a little bit about how VSGA members can find you. Maybe come see you, come buy some of your stuff. Tell me what you will be having for sale as we move into fall.
Excellent. So you can always visit us right here at the farm. We are in Cabot, Vermont, and we're located at 156 Urban Farm Way. And if you're online, our website is www.soxfamilyfarm.weebly.com. And we have information there about what we have for sale and our phone number to get a hold of us. It's always a good idea to call ahead or email us ahead of time, since we do tend to run around and do other things.
Right.
We don't have regular farm hours, but we're always happy to have visitors. So the things that we're selling this year, we have broiler chicken, but we are sold out. But you can get our list for next year. And we will be selling lamb in November, and that's by advanced order, so that's something to contact us well ahead of time about. We will have sheepskins coming in very soon, a good inventory of those. We have sheep tallow soap. And if you have people in your life that might need some gardening help, or would appreciate some consulting time, or might be interested in any of these farm products, we also have gift certificates. And those can be used either for camping, for gardening and consulting, or for any of our farm products. And you can get gift certificates by going to our website and dropping me an email.
Okay. And one more thing, what about the camping? So you showed us some of the campsites that are on there. So how do people, how far in advance do they need to register for camping?
I believe it's 12 hours notice. We're listed on Hip Camp. So
Okay.
if you go to Hip Camp, we are listed at Agricultural Bliss at Sox Farm. And so that's where you go ahead and make your reservations for a campsite and any extras you want to throw in, like a kayak rental.
Does it show you the campsites? I mean, are you able to see those? Or
We have pictures of some of the
Okay.
campsites on there.
they could call you.
Or they can give me a call, and I have a property map that I'm happy to send people that shows the location for all of these things. So currently we are just listed on Hip Camp. In the future we may be listing on a few other places as well, but that's the place to find us for now.
Mm-hmm. And then if you camp, you get to pick. And I see the
Potentially.
strawberries out there, so I may be renting a campsite
Yep.
tonight.
That
For short
is
notice.
That is one of our add-ons. Yeah, we have pick your own quarts when fruit is in season. So sometimes it's blueberries, sometimes raspberries, strawberries, could be grapes, could be apples. Just depends on the time of year.
Yeah. Michael, anything to add?
No.
Okay.
I think
She did a good job.
I think Susie said it all.
Very nice. So we are talking to Susie and Michael at the Sox Family Farm in Cabot, Vermont, and I wanted to thank you both for, again, joining VSGA. Congratulations on that, and for joining us. One of the things that we enjoy doing is having the opportunity to sit down with people who are willing to share not only the information, but their philosophy of why they farm. So it's been great, and I appreciate it very much.
Prior to us moving in, a long time ago, it had been a dairy farm, but since then, it had just been hayed and nothing really added back in. So definitely, it was a little tired. There were tractor ruts. There were mucky spots. So we found that getting the animals out there adds a little bit of fertility. Their little feet do a good job gently churning up the soil, and I think, helping some of the seeds to germinate a bit. I'm assuming that's part of what's going on out there. Keeping the pasture a little bit shorter in places has helped it to be less wet in some spots. So there were some pretty overgrown areas that were just kind of swampy, not in a good wetlands kind of swampy, but just hard to pasture in. So they've helped us keep it short, and I think rotationally moving them around fairly often. The plants out there seem to respond really well to that. They bounce back in a hurry now.
And it's a very different grazing than the cattle were grazing.
I would presume so. I mean, that was well before our time, but I would assume that back then they probably just fenced a lot of it and let them go. But again, I can't really speak to what they were doing back then.
I think it's a different type of grazing too.
So we've done that. We've recently gotten a flail mower that when the sheep are done, we can go out and kind of high cut anything that they didn't like. So we're trying a little bit to cut back on a few of their less palatable things rather than let that go to seed because they chose not to eat it, and then you end up with like more and more of that thing. So those are our two main management things. Can you think of anything I've missed?
Yeah, I mean, we march the chickens around. So
the chicken fertility has been huge.
Yeah, so we have the feed input from the chickens, and then the sheep follow to a certain extent. As we rotate around the pasture. I mean, the chickens don't get too far from here, but the sheep, pretty much everywhere on our 30 acres, the sheep have been at least every other year or so.
Yeah. Anything else? That was it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was fun to talk to you today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.